open up the champagne. Pop. It's my house, come on, turn it up. Hear a knock on the door and the night begins. Cause we've done this before, so you come on in. Make yourself at my home, tell me where you've been. Pour yourself something cold, baby, cheers to this. Sometimes you gotta stay in, and you know where I live. Yeah, you know what we is. Sometimes you gotta stay in. Welcome to my house, baby, take control now. We can't even slow down. We don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house, play the music too loud. Show me what you do now. We don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house. Welcome to my house. Morning comes and you know that you wanna stay. Close the blinds, let's pretend that the time has changed. Keep our clothes on the floor, open up champagne. Let's continue tonight, come on, celebrate. That's how we do it. Sometimes you gotta stay in, and you know where I live. Yeah, you know what we is. Sometimes you gotta stay in. Welcome to my house, baby, take control now. We can't even slow down. We don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house, play that music too loud. Show me what you do now. We don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house. Welcome to my house. Duck off the crib to spot the bag, but my house is your house if you throwing it back. Excuse me if my home draining is sad. Soon as these happy faces land, you can run with the cash. Home run, slam dunk, touchdown pass. Mi casa es tu casa, so it ain't no holding back. Another shot of vodka, you know what's in my glass. It's my house, just relax. Welcome to my house, baby, take control now. We can't even slow down. We don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house, play that music too loud. Show me what you do now. We don't have to go a while. Welcome to my house. Welcome to my house.
I'm tryna put you in the worst mood. I be one cleaner than your church shoes. I really point to just to hurt you. I already lamb just to tease you. None of these toys on the lease too. I made your whole year in a week too. I main bitch out of your league too. I side bitch out of your league too. I house so empty, need a centerpiece. 20 racks of table cut from ebony. Cut that ivory into skinny pieces. Then she clean up with the face, man, I love my baby. You're talking money, need a hearing aid. You're talking about me, I don't see the shade. Switching my style, I take any lane. I switch up my cup, I kill all my pain.
Intro class, we're going to just start from the basics, understanding the tools, panels, and Illustrator workspace, how to create a new document. Then we're going to move on to how to use all of the fancy selection tools, including the elusive direct selection tool. We'll also cover vector illustration using shapes, the pen and pencil tool, applying brush strokes and saving swatches and gradients. We'll also do a deep dive into type and typography and show you all the tips, shortcuts, and tricks to make you more proficient and more creative using Illustrator. Now, this course is designed to be an interactive hands-on course. So occasionally you'll hear me say, hey, pause the video and practice on your own. So make sure you download the class files from the link below to do so. This will ensure you get the most out of the course and learn the program in a more experiential, hands-on manner. Now, I'm looking forward to teaching you all the cool things that Illustrator has to offer, so stay tuned and get ready to learn. If you're enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe. If you want to earn certificates and digital badges, please become a member of our Patreon. The link is in our video description. If you have any questions you want answered by one of our instructors, please join our off-site community. The link is in the description as well. And as I mentioned, this course does have exercise files, and you'll find them in the video description below.
There's a new way to experience social media, and thankfully, it doesn't involve mindlessly scrolling.
So where should we begin? Let's imagine that this is our first day of medical school and we need to know where all the body parts are. We need to know our anatomy. So when we are doing an examination, when we're doing some kind of surgery, we need to know where things are. In Illustrator and a lot of Adobe programs, we have something called our workspace. This current workspace is called the Essentials workspace. And that essentially is giving us our tools over here on the left-hand side as one column. And you can see over here on the right-hand side, I have my properties, I have my layers panel, and I have my libraries panel. Now, if you click over here in the far upper right, you're going to see this little dude right there. When you click on that, you're going to see all of these different individual workspace types. So depending on what you're doing, you may have a variety of different preset workspaces. These are things that Illustrator just gives to us. So if I were to change this, let's just say to typography, everything's going to change dramatically to look very different. Let's try another one. I click on this. Let's go over here to painting. And look at that, a lot of very, very different stuff. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go right back to Essentials. And I'm going to click on that again. I'm going to say Reset Essentials in case I've made some modifications to that. It is all set back to where the default is. Okay, now what we're going to learn how to do is pretty much just customize these things. So in the upper left-hand side, you're going to see that little double arrow right there. That is essentially going to allow me to make this go from one column to two columns, because I really like that. I like that how that's set up a little better, easy for me to navigate through all of these little icons here. And notice how it kind of groups it together. I don't got to go up and down. So I really like that. And we're going to be going through all these things in subsequent lessons. On the right-hand side, you'll see again, I have my properties panel, I have my layers panel, and I have my libraries panel. Okay, that's great, fantastic. Now, I like those there, but there's other ones that I might want to see that are not here. So how do I bring up other panels for me to work with? Up on top here, you will see I have this little menu here called the window menu, and that is essentially the factory for where all of our panels live. All right, so you'll see that there's a lot of panels for me to work with. I want to essentially bring some of these in so I can work with them over and over and over again, right? Have easy access to them. So let's, for example, bring up the appearance panel, a very important panel in Illustrator. I want that. And then notice it comes smack there in the middle. I can just drag this from the top, move it wherever I want. That's great. Go over to here. Let's go to Window. Let's bring up Artboard. Absolutely another very, very important one. I love that. All right. And now let's maybe bring up, let's just say Color, and let's bring up Swatches. Great. And this is just many that's available, as you can see. Now, you will notice that a lot of these come with their own little sort of brothers and cousins and uncles that like, okay, swatches, like, hey, if you want me, you got to get brushes too. You got to get symbols too. Okay, well, do I want those right now? I'm not really sure if I do. So for example, there's symbols. don't even really know what a symbol is. Am I planning on using symbols? I don't know, maybe later on, but right now I know I don't need it. So very simply right click on the tab and choose close, and that goes away. Do I need brushes right now? I don't think so. I'm going to say close. Okay, very good. Now I'm going to keep that as is. And now, do I need something else like color guide? I'm going to get rid of that. But I notice that these two, color and swatches, should kind of be together. So very easily, I can then just join these right there just by clicking and dragging, waiting for my little blue halo, and then bam, now these are one and the same, all perfect, just like that. Love that, and that makes me very happy. Now, let's see what else we can do with some of these other ones, right? So let's just say, for example, my asset export, I don't want that, so I'm going to right-click on that and say close. But notice when you right-click, you get a lot of other options, right? To close it, to close the whole tab group, like we have a tab group here that would close everything. You can minimize it. Oh, that's kind of cool. Or I can double-click to then expand it out again. I can right-click and I can say collapse to icons, and that makes it nice and small, so it's just kind of even smaller, so it doesn't take up as much room. Okay, that's kind of neat. So I'm going to keep that there just for future reasons. Okay, and then I'm going to go over to here to appearance, and then you'll see I have a few other options here in the upper right. You can see I can click on this, which also collapses to icons. Click on this, it brings it back, and then click on my X, and then notice that goes away. Like, oops, what happens when you accidentally or even intentionally remove one of your panels? Guess what? We go right back to where we started, go to window, and what was it that I let go of? Was it appearance? Yep, bam, there it is, and it's back again. Okay, now let's go ahead and bring back another one. You can see here, I have a bunch of other options here I can work with. So let's just bring up, for example, info. That's a nice one. All right, have that there. All right, now let's start customizing this a little bit more. Let's say I want to bring these guys into their own little kind of panel areas, for example. So let's just say, for example, I wanted to have swatches and colors on their own kind of section over here. These guys have their own section. Why can't these guys? So you'll notice that when I drag this over here into this little area, you'll notice I get this like blue halo here. Come way down to the bottom, right? I'm gonna get a blue halo down there. Come over to here, I'm gonna get another blue halo. So this is gonna give me some choices in terms of where I want to place these things potentially, okay? You'll notice if I do it with this one, I'm just gonna go and simply click and drag. I can move this over here if I want to, but because this is an icon, I want you to notice something kind of neat. If I move this right here in the center and I let go, notice how it creates a very different looking panel compared to how these are. So if I want to have like access to all of these guys here, but smaller versions, rather than having to take up all this space, I can then just move this, wait for my little blue halo, and then bam, I can do that, I can do that, and then I can also move these guys here just the same. And you see, very nice, nice and neat. I love that. I love it so much that I want to save this. So right now, this workspace is just called Essential Workspace. I want to make a new workspace for myself. Just say new workspace. I'm going to call this Dave's Faves and click OK. And now when I click on this, you will see, there it is, Dave's Faves. Now, when is that going to come in benefit for me? How am I going to find an advantage for this at some point? Let's say I go crazy with all this here, right? Like I move properties over here, I got layers over here, I accidentally delete libraries. Oh my God, things are just insanity. Not at all how I wanted things to be when I started off so idealistic in the beginning. What could I do? Very simply, I go back to where I was before over here to my workspace, and guess what? I still have Dave's Faves selected. So what I need to do is reset whatever workspace you have here. I like to think about this as the Mary Poppins effect, right? Where it puts all your toys, everything in its place, everything in place for everything in place for everything in its place, or something more articulate than that. So I click on that and then watch what happens. Everything goes exactly back to where it was. Awesome. Love that. Okay, now let's do one other thing. I'm going to go over here to Window, and this time I'm going to bring up something called my control bar. So I click on that, and you'll notice that this little guy now appears way up on top. We did not have that before. So I say to myself, like, okay, well, I just added on something really critical, and I want that to be part of Dave's faves. So what do? I go back over to here, and then guess what I'm going to do? I have to say new workspace, and then literally type it in again, exactly word for word. It's kind of like a save as, but you see a name already exists. Click OK to overwrite. I don't know if you can see that, right? So you can see, all right, good. So it recognized that. That's exactly what I want. And then it overrides it. So then if I'm going to do any kind of reset or something like that, then it's going to always remember that I have this new option there as well. All right. So please pause the video, get your workspace all set up. Again, go to Essentials at first, reset Essentials, and then try to have yours look like mine as much as possible. All right, and then when we come back, we're going to do a little bit more overview of what's what on the screen, and then very soon you'll be illustrating in no time.
Never-ending, finger-swiping, mouse-holding scrolling. Wouldn't it be nice to flip through online pages?
Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had some good luck and experience working with your new workspace, and yours looks like mine. So let's get a little deeper into what some of these panels do and how they can make our lives easier and more creative. So let's start off over here on the left-hand side where we have our Tools panel. And you'll notice here our Tools panel has a number of different individual icons that accomplish a number of different things, right? Just think about the Tools panel as like a toolbox. Each tool has its own different purpose. So if you're going to hammer something, you're going to use the hammer. But then when you're done hammering, you put it back and you grab the screwdriver. So each of these little individual icons have a different purpose, and then therefore you have to change when you want to change something else. So let's just start off over here. You'll see this is the Move tool. This is our Direct Selection tool. Notice you get a little tooltip for each of these. That's great. Some things you might recognize like the Rectangle tool, right? And just all these things you can move your mouse over and you can see exactly what they do. You'll also notice that when you move your mouse over it, they all have little letters next to them. These are the keyboard shortcut that you use in order to access them. So for example, this is V. So if I literally just type V, not Control V, not Command V, notice that will access the Move tool. If I hit A, which is right next to it, that selects the Direct Selection tool. If I hit T, guess where that's going to take me? It's going to take me to the Type tool. So you'll want to start to kind of memorize these things as you go along. Okay, so very important. Now over here on the bottom, you're going to see there's some other options for color. We're going to get into those in a lot more detail later on. Now, one of the more important panels that you have in Illustrator is the Properties panel. Okay, so coming all the way over here, okay, this is invaluable. And this is going to come up in so many different capacities depending on what you're doing. So for an example, like I'm doing nothing right now, and I have properties of my entire document. Like what's happening here? Really? Wow, so this is actually telling me a whole bunch of different things. What's my unit of measure right now? Okay, that's cool. Okay, what artboard am I working with here? I can go from these 3 different artboards I have here. We'll talk about artboards in more detail later on. I can very easily add on rulers and grids just by simply clicking, and then look at that. My ruler now just appeared, and now I'll be able to see, oh, well, you know what? I don't really want to work in these units of measure, so I can go ahead and go over here to inches. Notice how that changes. Let's change this to pixels. Okay, great, fantastic. So now I'm able to see how I can work with my Properties panel on a much larger scale. And as we go through the program, as we go through more exercises, we'll be coming back to this within this perspective. Now let's just say, for example, I'm working on this bottle. Notice when I click on the bottle, my Properties panel now changes. Okay, it is based on the context of what you click on, then your Properties panel will change based off of the context of what you've actually clicked on. Okay, now if I double click on this, you'll see I'm now inside of this bottle, and you'll start to see even more stuff within this object that I can see the properties of, like the color of it, if there's a stroke, if there's any opacity, all this kind of stuff out here. I'm going to double click in this white area again, and now I'm back to my main canvas. All right, so the Properties panel is incredibly valuable. You'll also see that we have our Layers panel. I have 3 layers here. Let me go ahead and click on my little eyeball there. Like, okay, that makes my avocado go away. That makes my bottle go away, and this makes my pepper go away, okay? And we're gonna, again, do a lot more on these individual ones, all right? As we go through the program, we're gonna be exploring all these individual panels in much larger degree, okay? Now, another thing we'll want to understand here is our, what we called earlier, our control. Remember, this is the control. We brought that in last minute in the last exercise. And you're going to see the control overlaps a little bit with what we see over here in our properties panel. So let me go ahead and go to my avocado. I'm going to double click on that to get into my green. And then notice it shows me this green fill color. And it also gives me some other options for making my stroke a certain size, just essentially stroke as your outline. And then you can do all kinds of other things with the stroke style and blah, 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 alignment, etc. But notice how there's some overlap. Some people like to work with our control panel. Some people like to work with our properties panel, all right? Totally up to you. I just want you to know that both of those options are there for you. All right. Now, some other basic interface things is we want to understand how we can zoom in and zoom out. Now, I like to use the keyboard shortcut, but I do want you to notice that way down below here, you're going to see is the option of how I'm zoomed in currently. Okay, that's great. So you can see, fantastic. I can zoom in this way to go in, let's just say 300. Like, oh man, okay, where am I now? I don't even really know. So let me just come right back to where I was before. That was a little bit disorienting. And I come right back to that. That's why I like to either use the keyboard shortcut or a combination of my mouse and keyboard shortcut. So if I use the keyboard shortcut of just Control or Command plus plus, that allows me to go in, and then minus minus allows me to go out. But if you hold down the Alt or Option key and you have a little mouse wheel, or even your trackpad, you can zoom in exactly where you want. So I'm going to come right to the center of the avocado pit. And look how much I'm going. I'm like 200, 400, 800% in there, right? Amazing. So I have that. I'm all set up, ready to go. All right. So use all these different, tools that whatever you find comfortable for you. All right. Now you'll also notice to the right of this, right, way down again on the bottom, you can see here it says this says selection. What does that mean? Okay, it means whatever kind of tool you're working with, it's going to show you what tool you're in. So I changed that. Now I'm in the selection tool, direct selection tool. Click on that. So that's kind of nice. You kind of know, like, what am I looking at again? In case you kind of forget, or maybe you're working on 2 monitors, something like that. You can always look down there to see where you're at. And then you'll see down here, you will see all my different artboards as well. So we're going to be talking about artboards, but you can see avocado, bottle, and pepper. 1, 2, 3. Those are my 3 different artboards that I'm currently working with. Just think about them as pages. But we're going to be talking about artboards in a very large degree momentarily. All right. So this will get you going for some just like basic things in terms of our zooming, in terms of our moving in with our artboards, etc. I'm going to show you one last thing as you're moving in. Let me just move in real close. One really critical keyboard shortcut, I'm going to go ahead and type this out for you here, is to simply just hold down the space bar, and then you're going to click and drag, right, as you do that. Why? That essentially allows you to pan across the canvas, right? So watch as I do that. If I hold down the space bar, notice how my hand now appears, and I click and drag, still holding down to the space bar. I let go, and it takes me back to the tool that I was just in. Okay, see that? Hold on the space bar, temporary access to this little hand tool, or I like to call it the pan tool. And you can see I can go this way. Notice I can go in a very non-linear way to go wherever I want. All right. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is how we get out of this. How do we get out of this to go back to our basically like our main sort of best fit window? And that is going to be Control plus 0. Think about that as like ground zero. Okay, if you're on the Mac, that's going to be Command plus 0. So what does that look like? Let me just try that. So Control plus 0, and look at that. I'm now best fit on the current artboard that I'm in right now. Okay, so watch as I zoom in again. Controller Command 0 takes me right back. All right, so you're going to want to write a few of these ones down. Some of these keyboard shortcuts you may have seen over here that are going to be very valuable for you. How to actually zoom in, how to zoom out, how to pan, and also how to come right back to a best fit, because these things are going to serve you immeasurably as you get more and more deep into the program. And if you want to be more efficient and a little more expert, I highly, highly recommend you do that. If not now, at some point in the very near future, start to incorporate like 1 or 2 or 3 of these keyboard shortcuts, a day, and just really only do those, like really perfect it until you get it, until you feel more comfortable with it. All right, so pause the video, practice this, and we'll see you in the next exercise. Now, before we begin creating our new documents in Illustrator, let's get some things out of the way about what Illustrator is even used for and how it's different than other programs within the Adobe suite. Adobe makes a number of different kind of main programs like Photoshop and InDesign and Illustrator and other ones, of course, like Premiere and After Effects. But instead, there is an abundance of overlap between all 3 of them. Okay, more than ever, you will see that you can actually create vector images in all 3 programs. You can manipulate bitmap images in all 3 programs. Okay, so it's actually really nice that Adobe has done that for us. So we have access to be able to do that. Now, what is the difference between a bitmap and a vector, you ask? I can hear you thousands of miles away asking that same question. On the right-hand side, we have what is known as a bitmap image. Okay, this is basically pixel-based. All right, so this has millions and millions and millions of pixels, but it's finite. So if I were to make this super, super big, it would start to get a little bit grainy or pixelated, as opposed to a vector image, right? Which is, if I double click on this, a little bit more of a smooth type of graphic, right? If I were to actually make this bigger and bigger and bigger, because of the vector technology, it essentially has a mathematical program built into it that it resets itself, so therefore it does not lose any of its graphic quality. All right, so when you are creating graphics inside of Illustrator, you are essentially creating them as vector graphics. Now you can bring in these bitmap images, certainly, and you can have them work together side by side. But when you're drawing graphics like this and this and this, you will see how nice and smooth they are. And watch how nice it is when I get really, really close up. You don't really see any pixelation. If I go over to these guys here and I come in there, you can see how it starts to get a little bit kind of grainy. See that? I'm like literally looking at what? A pixel. All of these little squares are pixels. Pixel is just a contraction for picture elements, right? That's what we're looking at here. So you see that? We're kind of just really looking at a molecular level of these images. Whereas with vector images, vector graphics, we don't have that. All right, so we're going to be learning how to create vector images from scratch using a variety of different tools, but I want to just kind of get that out of the way just so you understand what Illustrator primarily does, how it can potentially work together with the other Adobe programs, and what maybe some of the limitations you might see when you are working with bitmap images versus vector. Now, you will see that the vector also has just like 1 color, 3 colors, or whatever it is. You can have certainly like millions of colors as well, but it's not going to get the same detail as a bitmap. So you wouldn't necessarily make a photograph out of a vector. All right, so just understanding there's pros and cons, but really you want to think about it not really as pros and cons, but sort of like usage and application for both of them. All right, so just want to get that out of the way, digest that, and we'll see you in the next video. Let's now discuss how we create a brand new document. Now, when you're working with Illustrator, it's going to be very similar to other programs potentially, where we're going to ask you how big you want the document to be, potentially what's the color profile, but it's also going to ask you things like, well, what artboard do you want to use? And maybe what kind of bleed do you want? Things like that, and possibly even, our units of measure, that kind of thing. So we want to kind of think about these things ahead of time. And looking at my document here, you'll notice I have 3 artboards, and you'll also notice that here's the size of each individual one by pixels, right? You can see this, my unit of measure is measured in pixels, etc. So what we want to do now is create our own new document, knowing what we know now, and let's just see what that dialog box looks like. So many times when you just start Illustrator, it's going to come up, giving you the option to do a new document. We're going to do it directly from this interface by going to File and New, but also notice the keyboard shortcut. Big fan of keyboard shortcuts, so you'll hear me talk about that a lot. Control N or Command N takes you now to something that might potentially look like this. Now, I want you to just not get distracted by anything down below. I want you to get distracted by this. You can see here I have a number of different tabs here: saved, mobile, web, etc. And they're giving me some nice little sort of presets. So if I go over here to mobile, you'll see there's some nice little presets based off of the different phone sizes, and you'll also see the different units of measure there. You go to web, different kind of presets, right? So maybe I'm doing a mock-up for a website. Great, it's all set up for me, ready to go. Go to print. Notice how it's a different unit of measure this time. It's in points. Okay, and then film and video, art and illustration, etc. You'll also notice that Illustrator is very generous enough to give you a whole bunch of different templates to work with, so definitely check those out if you're feeling comfortable with that. All right, now you'll also see here is saved. So you may actually have some that you've been saving, so you can use them over and over and over again. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to create a new one, and then we're going to go ahead and actually save it, so I don't have to actually create it all over again. So I'm going to go over to here, just choose print. And again, here are my presets. I'm going to go over to this side and now make my custom changes on all these different things here that I have available to me. So for example, I want to make this in inches. Notice how it now changes. That's great. And I want to change the orientation from portrait to landscape. That's great. Love that. And then here is the thing I was talking about before, is working with artboards. Okay, how many artboards do you want? Okay, so for right now, I'm just going to say 2, so you can see how you do it. We're going to have a whole discussion on artboards in a little bit. All right, then we also have our bleed. Okay, so you might have something that looks like, let me come down to one of these templates, like this right here, how you want it to bleed off the edge here. So if you're going to do that, you typically are not going to say 0. You do want to go a little more than 0, so it goes off the edge. So when you are printing it, you don't accidentally get a little sort of like white sliver there or whatever the color of the paper is. Okay, so just keeping that in mind. Then you also want to think about your color mode. All right, notice here I have just 2 choices. RGB is if you're going to be doing something on the web or print, if it's going to be on a screen. And then CMYK is for when you're going to be printing it. Okay, because on the screen, our screen, the screen that you're looking at right now, is broken up as red, green, blue. That's like the magic that it's doing from the screen. And the magic that the printer itself is doing is through cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Maybe some of you have changed your printer cartridges before, and you say, why is this weird colors I've never used before? Wow, interesting. So that's how it's made up. Okay, now it's very important to establish this ahead of time. What is going to be the goal for your project? Is it going to be printed or is it going to be on the web? And then you're going to want to choose your color profile accordingly. All right. And then also notice here is raster effects. That's the word we just used earlier with our with when we talked about Illustrator vector versus raster objects or bitmap. So you want to decide how high quality is that going to be. For vector, it doesn't really matter. But essentially, how high quality it's going to be. And typically, this is going to be for print. You want to be pretty high like this. And if it's going to be for screen, notice here's 72 ppi. So really up to you. You'll know what your projects are. All right. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and click on Create. And now you see here, I have 2 artboards all ready to go. You can see it's set up in inches. I love that. That's great. And then guess what? I can do all kinds of other things here. Like I can turn my ruler on here. I can turn my grids on. Okay, I can do all kinds of really, really good stuff here. All right, so that's just the basics of creating something. In a little bit, we're going to learn how we can actually create something, but also learn some basic selection techniques. We have a lot more to go. Just want to get this out of the way so everybody's super comfortable with how to even get started. All right, so pause the video, practice that, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Now, before we actually start creating some things, let's get some of the basics out of the way. And one of the most basic fundamental skills you're going to have in Illustrator is selection. And I know it sounds very, very rudimentary, but it is very important because in order to affect it, you have to select it. So we really want to understand that when you want to manipulate something, edit something, it has to be selected. And there's a lot of different ways to select things. And there's some other nice little chips and tools that we're going to be getting into as well in terms of selection. That's kind of more than meets the eye. So let's see what our basic selection tools are here. You can see here is my regular selection tool. This is my direct selection tool. And again, if you go between the V and the T, they just switch up. Okay, so you can go ahead and switch these back and forth by the mouse or not. Okay, or you can use your keyboard shortcut. It just appears right there with the tooltip. Now, you will also notice that as I change, you will notice also my properties panel changes. Now, just again, keeping that in mind, understanding how the properties panel works. Now, I haven't even selected anything, and we haven't even talked about what's the difference between these two. Now, this regular selection tool will select an entire object, right? Pretty much like what you expect a selection tool to do in any other program you've worked with. That's essentially what selection does. And that's going to allow me to now just simply click and drag, move it around. It's also going to allow me to resize it. So if I hold down the Shift key while dragging on the corners here, I can then resize it. Why did I hold down the Shift key? Because I wanted to constrain the proportions, right? Just like that. See that if I don't, then it gets all wide. Maybe I want that, but again, up to you. And I'm just going to do Command or Control Z to undo, or just go to Edit and Undo. Okay, so very basic to be able to do that. Now, I also might want to rotate. So I'm still in the same tool. Now, watch what happens now when I move my mouse to the corner here. Notice I get this kind of little button hook. If I click and drag, now I can now change the direction and rotate this little shape. Okay, so it's kind of squiggly to get there. Now, another nice little tool is if you hold down the Shift key as you're doing this, watch what happens is it locks in place like every 45 degrees, right? And that's pretty cool. So if I know I want it to be exactly like that, I can do that. Or let's go 90 degrees. Cool. All right, so that's holding down the Shift key as I am rotating. All right, so pretty neat. Now let's take a look at some of our other options here. This is your direct selection tool, and this is going to be one that you'll be using just as much, if not more, than our regular selection tool, because we are working with these vector images. All of these are vector images. All of these are individual shapes, you might hear them called. And if you are working with the regular selection tool, you can't manipulate these individual parts of it to really get a custom shape, but you can with the direct selection tool. So watch what happens now when I choose this right here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I get these like individual little path points, right? These individual path points, or maybe you hear them called vector points. Let's go to this one. This one has a lot of path points. Wow. Let's go to this one. Okay, just a handful here. So notice whenever there's kind of a curve or whatever, that's where you're going to see these little path points. And you'll see here, if I move my mouse over it, see it kind of lights up a little bit. That's great. All right, cool. So that's how we can select our individual shapes. We're going to get into in a little bit how we can work a little bit more fluidly with our direct selection tool. At this point, kind of want to get that out of the way. Now, if you right click on this, you'll see there's a few other options here. Like you have a group selection. Things could be grouped. So you can then just go ahead and it just works on the whole group right there. So bam, that's going to kind of overlap between this. In future exercises, we're going to see how this is really going to help us. Then you also have the lasso tool. This is another selection to be able to do, right? So if I choose this, watch what happens when I just kind of like lasso through. I'm just going to basically just touch this. Notice how that's now selected. Okay? But I want you to notice that what isn't selected is this part down here. Okay? So you'll notice that there's this little area right there that's hollow, where this area is filled, right? Essentially telling me that this is selected, this is not. So let's just do that again, but this time I'm going to lasso over the entire thing, and now everything is now filled. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind, that the lasso tool can be really helpful, but many times if you accidentally don't select or you don't touch a certain part of it, if you don't go like through where those anchor points are, then you may not actually be selecting what you think. But notice how I don't even really have to touch anything. As soon as I now close up my loop, everything now gets selected. If I would just hit delete right now, everything then gets deleted. I'm just going to undo that and then come right back there. All right, so those are your nice little basic selection techniques. All right, and we're going to come back. We're going to do a few more, but just practice that and we'll come back in the next lesson. Let's now discuss another tool called the Magic Wand tool, which is going to help us with a different type of selection that's going to make things potentially a little more efficient for us. So in this document, we have a lot of different colors and a lot of different strokes. And sometimes we want to just select sort of like things, like similar things that are on the page here for us. So if I want to choose like all my blue right now and all the shapes that are blue, I'd have to like go over to here. I remember we learned about the lasso tool, and I can just kind of just go through. Oh, man, that is a big pain. I got to go through all that. I guess, you know, you can also use the shift tool. I heard about that. You can hold on the shift key. You can do that. All right, and that or maybe even the command or control. Does that work? You know, it's not really as good as I'd like it to be. So what we're going to learn about is this guy here, the Magic Wand tool, the Magic Wand tool. So before we even do it, before we even execute what it can do, we're going to learn about something within Illustrator that's going to be very important to do for all these tools, which is simply that you can double click on one of these icons to then see all of these options that are hiding there. A lot of other Adobe programs don't have that ability. When you double click on a lot of these icons, you actually get a whole bunch of options that pop up that are reflective of that tool. So the Magic Wand tool is going to allow me to select similar things, but I have to choose, what am I actually choosing? In this case, notice fill color is chosen. So when I choose the Magic Wand tool and I choose this fill color, guess what? Every shape that has that blue fill color will then get chosen. Isn't that amazing? So cool. Let's do this now. I'm going to choose just stroke color. And let's just choose all the ones that have white. So I just simply click, and look at that. All of the white shapes get chosen. It's the coolest thing. Maybe it's all the ones that have stroke weight, etc. Now, why is this important? Because let's say my client comes in and says, hey Dave, we're not doing white strokes anymore. You know, that's so 2020. We're not doing that anymore. So let's just change it to black. Oh, cool. Now I can do that for every single one of them because every single one of them is chosen. Same thing for fill color. All right. And then, you know, some of these other maybe potentially more complex ones that you're working with in terms of stroke weight, opacity, and blend mode. All right. We're going to be getting into those in subsequent lessons, but I want you to understand how amazing the Magic Wand tool is for doing selections. Okay, so now that I see that all these are selected, let's just say I hit delete, they're all gone. Okay, so you have to select it to affect it. That's the way that I wanted to affect it, right? So very, very cool. All right, so again, we learned that you can double click on one of these icons to get more options, and then we actually executed it based off of what we chose, and then we did whatever we wanted to do to affect it. So go ahead and pause the video, practice that maybe with some other tools that you have available, other projects you're working on, or certainly use this one. Okay, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Okay, well, ready or not, we are now going to learn how to do some basic illustration. And we're going to start off just by using some of the shape tools that Illustrator gives us. All right, so you will see on the left-hand side where our tools are, we have this little box right there, and you'll notice that tiny little triangle right there, which is indicating to me that when I right-click, I have a whole bunch of options here to draw out in terms of what shapes I want to work with. Now, you'll also notice that Illustrator gives this nice little arrow here that's going to allow us to do, guess what? Click on that and then tear that tool away. So therefore, I don't have to keep going back here to then go ahead and draw out what shapes I want. Okay, so I don't have to actually keep going here and then, oh, I want to choose a polygon this time. I can just go right to here and work with that. All right, now let's start drawing out some shapes. So if I just simply click on that right now, I'm going to draw out a rectangle. Now, you will see, I'm going to just click and drag here, and then I have a white rectangle. Okay, that's great. Now, why did that come out white? Let me go ahead and delete that. Let's discuss what's actually happening before I even start going crazy with all this and waste my time. This is coming in white because, if you notice here, I have a white box right there, and you also notice I have a white box right there telling me essentially what the fill color is going to be. So do you want that to be the fill color? Maybe not. You'll also notice that there's another option here, which is telling me what my stroke color is going to be. What is the stroke? Stroke is essentially just the outline of that shape. So I don't like to do white in this case because white is going to be on top of white, so I'm not going to choose white. I want to choose a different color. So I'm going to simply just double click on this, and then it pops right up to my color picker. And you'll notice here I can choose from any number of color hues over here on the left-hand side. And on the left-hand side, I'm going to choose my different shading of that set of hues. Okay, we're going to get into more detail on colors, but just while we're here, let's just understand how we can work with this. Here is all of our different hues, and then here is going to be the shading. And then you can also change all of the little brightness options of what that's going to be. Now you'll also notice that there's going to be these options over here on the right-hand side for, is it going to be RGB, and or is it going to be CMYK, or is it going to be our hexadecimal values? Now, you will need to know what those things are. Your design team or whoever is going to tell you what that's going to be. And you're going to say, hey, what's the CMYK value? And they'll give you those 4 numbers. Hey, what's the RGB value? And they'll give you those 3 numbers. Or they're going to give you the hexadecimal number, and you will put that in. Okay, so totally up to you, but I want you to just notice here how that changes on all levels for all of these. Okay, so let's just choose this nice pretty purple color. I'm going to click OK. Now, notice what's going to happen. I'm going to have a purple fill and a black stroke, and I'm just going to simply hold down the Shift key so I can have a perfect square. Great, wonderful. Okay, love that. Now, one thing to understand is that if I click right now, notice what pops right up, right? And that's the thing that's going to make you go nuts. Like oh, it's asking me to draw a rectangle. I don't want to do that. So what I want to do is just either come back to my move tool. You notice here is selection, right? And that's going to kind of give me sort of like a neutral place to be. And you'll also notice that under select, there's the option to deselect if you want to, and notice the keyboard shortcut. And that's the same thing. So essentially it takes you to kind of like a nice neutral place as you're doing this. All right. So therefore you don't accidentally keep getting that dialog box to pop up. I can guarantee you it's going to happen like a million times to all of you the first week or two. All right. Now let's try a different one. Right click. Actually, I don't even need to do that because guess what? This is sitting here waiting for me. Fantastic. And this time I'm going to choose a different color. Click OK and hold down the Shift key, and beautiful. Wonderful. Fantastic. I can move this however I want. I can resize it coming from the corners. That's great. Lovely. So cool. Let's check out some other things here. Let's go over here to the polygon tool. And then watch what happens now when I just click and drag. It's going to give me kind of like a, well, is that what I want? I don't know. Is that how many sides I want? So maybe, I don't know. So let me actually delete that. Let's see what we can do now to get different sides. Watch what happens now when I click and drag and I start tapping on my keyboard where you find the arrow keys. It's going to allow me to add or subtract sizes of the variety of different polygons I can work with. Okay, let me do that one more time so you can see that in action. Click and drag, and then watch this. Up arrow is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Down, 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 all the way back to 3. So as I'm clicking and dragging, I'm just tapping on the keyboard. You see that? Just tapping on my arrow keys. Okay, so that's great. Love that. And here we are. Okay, so nice little set of features there for us to work with in a really cool way as you're clicking and dragging on this. All right, now, if you do have the polygon tool and you don't like to use that, you could then just simply click and it's going to ask you, hey, how many sides do you want? And I could say, okay, you know what? I want 8 sides, 9 sides. Okay, I click OK, and then it just draws it out for me. So you have all those options, however you want to do it. I like the first way because I think it's pretty slick and I can see it on the fly, but again, up to you. Now, you'll also see here that if I wanted to change the color, like I don't want all of them to be the same color. So if I want to change my triangle to be a different color, I can then go back to here and then choose a different color, different hue, different shading. Okay, that's great. And you'll also notice that I could choose from here as well. Notice this one takes me to what's called my swatches, which we're going to get to in a little bit. But these are all basically just like saved colors. All right, I click on, let's say that one. Great, fantastic. And also you'll notice one more option here is in my appearance panel, which you should all have up right now. And you'll see it's another way of getting to your swatches panel. Just make that orange. You can see how easy that is. All right, now the last thing we're going to talk about in our shapes is this beautiful star menu. All right, so this time I'm going to access the star menu from here, so you can see what that does. And guess what? I can click and drag on the star, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to hit plus, plus, plus. How cool is that? To then have the first bit of my Lisa Simpson haircut. All right, that's awesome, fantastic. Of course, I can rotate this, resize it, and do whatever I want to do with that. Okay. Now the star is slightly interesting because I might not want my star to look exactly like this. I know how many sides I want, but there's something called the radius that I can play around with. So when I choose this, and then I do my alternative by just simply clicking, you're going to notice that I now have a bunch of different options here for my different radii. Okay, so I have my 9 points, but let's just go ahead and just make this go maybe about 10 inches. All right, I'm going to click OK. And now, whoa, look what that did. Okay, that's my radius going outward just like that. Let's do another one. All right, let's bring that back down to 3. And then this one, let's make that 5 inches. Okay, and you can see, oh, okay, and that's the radii going in from the center. Okay, so we're going to learn how we can customize each individual point if you want to, right? If you want to kind of really customize this. But I just want you to see how you can really kind of go crazy with the different stars, right? So you don't just keep the ones that they give you. You can, again, play around with the different radii and explore what's going to be best for you. All right, and let me just bring this over to here so it's not sharing the artboard with the other one. I'll just show you one more because this might be coming up, which is the line. And line's pretty simple. Let me just go ahead and just hold in the shift key. That gives me a perfectly straight line. And I can change the color of that, which is a stroke. And I can also change the width and do all that stuff. So now that we understand also a little bit how the line works, how you can actually use this, because this is essentially is a stroke, you should understand that these all have strokes on them too. You can barely see them. You can't really see the color, but each of them has strokes on them. And later on, we're going to get into much more detail on it, but I want you to notice, in case you missed it, that there are some strokes here. So if you go over here in the upper left, you'll see here's the option to change your stroke. You'll also notice over here on the far right in my appearance and properties panel, you'll see here it is to be able to change the width of our strokes. So let's just do that again for my circle, and I'll do it this time. I'll bring this up, up, up. And this time I'm going to change the color of my stroke to something very different. Let's make that yellow and click OK, and pretty cool. Now I'm able to see, oh, okay, cool. I can manipulate shapes in a variety of different ways. I can draw my shapes. I can choose my fill color. I can choose my stroke. Then I can manipulate it afterwards, and then I can manipulate the stroke width and the stroke color. All right, so we learned about how to draw a number of different shapes. Now, why is this important for when you're working in Illustrator? For many people, working with shapes is the building block for just basically creating your characters, right? It could be an icon. It could be so many different things, like looking at our avocado. Like this started off as a circle, and our pit started off as a circle. And you see we just kind of built around that. And notice how there is this label as a square. This bottle started off as a certain way. And we're going to learn how we can do some of these things, even make rounded corners and do all kinds of other things in just a little bit. So these are the basics of our shapes. Pause the video, practice up, and we'll see you in the next lesson. So as we've seen so far, shapes are definitely a necessary part of your design, of any kind of project you're working on, documents big or small, just for a variety of different reasons, just to maybe frame things, for visual interest, for decoration, whatever it is. Okay. Now, drawing out your shapes, there is more nuance than just simply clicking and dragging. And Illustrator gives you a lot of pretty neat shortcuts to be able to accomplish a variety of different goals. And they're a lot of the shapes that we have access to. So we can see here, of course, we have all of our basic shapes. And we also have some other ones, right, that you may not have noticed before, like our spiral tool, our grid tool, our polar grid tool. So let's now discuss some of these little nuances. So for example, let's say I want to draw out a perfect circle going concentrically from the middle. So I'm going to go over to here to my ellipse tool, and I want to draw this out concentrically from the center of this circle, of this shape. So we're going to add on another modifier, which is the Alt or Option key, while holding down the Shift key. So I'm going to move my mouse right here to the center, and then I'm just going to hold down the Alt, Option key, and then bam, look at that. See how it grows out from the center. I let go, and you can see perfect. Okay, and of course I'd want to fill that in so I can really see it. Okay, lovely, amazing. Okay, we're going to learn how to work with guides and grids and stuff in future lessons to really make that where we start off in a perfect place. But for right now, just understand that's pretty neat. Let me do that one more time, and I'm going to just this time do it with a square. And what am I doing? Again, it's a perfect square because I'm holding on the Shift key, and it grows out from the center because I'm holding down the Alt or Option key. Okay, so I'll do that again. Bam, bam, and let's just see, watch it grow. Amazing. Love that. That is so cool. All right, now let's go ahead and explore some other features. So let's go over here to my star tool. Watch what happens now when I click and drag out from here, and then notice how I'm getting a certain number of spikes. So watch what happens when I hit the up arrow. Whoa, that's so cool. The down arrow, very cool, right? So what are you trying to get? So the arrow key is allowing me to now manipulate how many spikes I'm getting on my star, right? Really, really easy to do, but incredibly valuable for being efficient and also being a little more creative. Okay, so try those little nuances. Okay, so in that same vein, using our keyboard shortcuts, our up, down, and arrows, let's go ahead and just explore some other ones here. Like the spiral tool, relatively basic, right? So watch what happens now as I click and drag. Actually, before I do that, let's make sure that I have some kind of thing to work with. Let's make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to make it so it has no fill right there. Thank you very much. Okay, now if I click and drag now, notice I can just click and drag to get my spiral in such a certain way. But now if I hit the up arrow, see that? I can actually make it much, much more spirally. Okay, and I can make it go further out like that or come in like that. Whatever you're trying to do, pretty neat. And there you go. Okay, and then of course you can play around with brush strokes on this. You can play around with your strokes in general. You can do all kinds of different things we're going to learn about in future lessons. But you'll see how neat that is with some modifiers. Let's try some other ones. Let's go over here to our rectangular grid tool. Really good for organizing your content in a very structured way. But as the name implies, it's going to create sort of like a table, if you will. But how does it create a certain number of rows and columns is really up to us. If I click and drag now, notice what I'm doing here. With my keyboard, I'm going to go up, up, up. And what is that doing? Adding on more rows, taking away rows. Go to the right, adding on more columns. Okay, so wow, pretty cool, pretty quickly and easily. And you can see, very nice. Now I can just structure my content however I please that way. All right, and then let's now just talk about the polar grid. And that is going to be right underneath here. And then this one is a little more kind of detailed, if you will, but still pretty cool nonetheless. Okay, so let me go ahead and draw out my polar grid. And you'll see, as I go up, 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 see that? How it adds on kind of more sort of latitude lines. I go down, 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 just like that. Or look at my little pie segments now. More or less. See that? So what are you trying to create? And now I can kind of make it just very simple to do whatever I like. Okay, so you have all the creativity in the world to be able to do something very, very detailed. Okay, and then of course I can fill this in. Maybe I'm going to add on a stroke, maybe a thicker stroke. And you can see how it sees every single one of these lines and the shape and everything like that as one unit. Okay, so it's pretty extraordinary, like how we can execute something so complex so easily. All right, so you want to practice all these, right? So just know that there's a lot of tips and tricks sort of under the hood by adding on little modifiers like our Alt key or Option key on the Mac, our Shift key. But then also try to put it out there where you're going to then use the up arrow key and the down arrow key just to explore and see what happens. All right, but then the last thing I want you to do, and again, this is going to be just sort of like a cultural thing, if you will, is always remember just to double click on an icon within Illustrator to see what options sort of like live underneath there that may give you more options than you realize and also help you execute a little faster. So for example, if I go ahead and double click on the polar grid here, you'll see, oh, this is giving me a number of different options. If you know exactly how many concentric dividers you want, how many radial dividers you want, you can play around with that here however you want. If you want to fill in the grid, right? Yes or no. So you want to play around with all of these because many of these options, including our rectangular grid, and we saw from our star earlier, they all have other options kind of like living underneath there. Okay, so highly, highly encourage you to experiment, have fun, and we'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to discuss the direct selection tool in a little bit more detail and just see what it can do for us in terms of just being able to manipulate our shapes in a little more kind of like nuanced way. Right? We've discussed a little bit about how we comparing our regular selection tool and our direct selection tool. Now let's really see it in action. So we have this nice little beautiful shape here, and I'm just going to simply click on my shape. And you'll notice here, okay, great. These little anchor points now appear. See that anchor point, anchor point. There's another anchor point there, okay? That's great. Now, what do they do for us? I want you to notice that when I click on this little anchor point right here, I'm gonna get these little handles that appear here. Click on that one, handles that appear here. Click on this one, no handles. Huh, interesting. How about this one? What about this one way down below? No handles. What is the difference between all these ones that I've just selected? One is a curve and one is not, right? It's just a corner. So Illustrator will treat each of these a little bit differently depending on the type of line or the type of shape that it in fact is. So let's go with something very easy and obvious to work with. Here is a very, very obvious just little corner that I can work with, right? So if I wanted to now manipulate this and just that point right there, if I click on this, I want you to notice how this becomes dark blue, just like that. Do you see that? That is now showing me that that point is now selected. And because I have the direct selection tool chosen, I can now manipulate this, right? So I click and drag and then, wow, look at that. How cool. Let's try this one. I'm just going to marquee over that. Sometimes that's easier. And then bam, I can make this go crazy just like that. Awesome. Fantastic. I love that. So cool. Just kind of treat it like taffy. Now, you'll notice that the one down here right below it is not a corner. So it has a little curve. So therefore, when I click on it, I'm going to get these little handles here. Okay. So again, taking a look at these little handles here, you will see that they're going to give us some power over these individual curves. These handles are known as Bezier handles, and they're going to allow you to control the direction and the magnitude and the degree of the curve as you click on these, right? So if I click and drag on this little guy right here, you'll notice how my curve can go out like that or in like this if you want to. Pretty cool. Come into here, and this time I'm actually going to bring this inward. I'm not just going to click and drag in a circle. I'm just actually going to bring it in so it's a little shorter. So that actually affects how my curve goes, right? So you'll notice that as I'm moving in, my curve then reflects that, right? You see that? How my curve now reflects that. Now it does it on both sides. We're going to explore how we can kind of manipulate that a little bit more. But at this point, it's really about controlling how these guys work as you move them around. So let's just now do another one. Let's come over here to our heart, and let's just see one more where I'm just going to drag this up or drag this back up. Okay, and you'll see also how these lines, how they compare with each other, makes this more symmetrical. Now, these guys also have something in the middle. And when you see the one in the middle, the little path point, it's very similar to how it works when you're working with just a regular corner, is that it's a lot more intuitive where you can just kind of move it up and down. Okay, but it stays with the curve, and then you can also make it more concave or more convex, however you want to do that. You can go to the left, you can go to the right. Okay, you have all that kind of control to manipulate this shape, and because this is a vector shape, guess what? It doesn't get pixelated at all. So I can make this just go totally crazy. Go in this direction and just drag that, Just make sure you have the actual anchor point chosen and just click and drag outwards like that. Great, and now I can just go nuts. All right, so this is a nice basic overview of how we work with the direct selection tool. Now if we come back to our shapes here, maybe something a little bit easier to work with. Let me go over to my star, and let's say I want to manipulate this little point to go up. Very simply, select that, come over to here, select that, come over to here. Maybe I want to make this come inward, come in like that. Okay, that's great. Okay, have this come in again, select it, make sure it is solid blue, and make this go out. And I'm really starting to kind of come together. Maybe this is going to go in like this. So you can really just start to customize this however you like. But it's really important that you are selecting your individual anchor point using the direct selection tool to then be able to manipulate it accordingly, however you like. Now we're only now working with what? With our corner points. But let's say, for example, I'm working with this shape right here, and I want to manipulate this to like start making a face. So I click on that. All I got to do now is click and drag this down, and there I am. Okay, so now I've got an alien, right? Or maybe I got a guitar pick, so it's just like, okay, it started off as a circle, and now it's something completely different. Okay, and these shapes are obviously very basic, and the shapes that we're working with here, relatively basic. And we come over here to these, you'll see that sometimes they're going to be a little bit more complex. So if I go back to my direct selection tool, I choose this, and you say, okay, wow, there's a lot of anchor points here. So I might want to manipulate these in such a way, and I have the option to, because I have all these little individual anchor points to work with. All right, so as we start moving forward and start drawing things out in a more complex way, we're going to learn about how anchor points really work for us, how we can add anchor points, how we can remove anchor points, etc. Okay, at this point, I really want you to just understand how we can work with the selection tool to be able to manipulate it. Then once we start drawing it out, then you're going to use a combination of shapes, our direct selection tool, and guess what? The pen tool and the pencil tool. All right, so pause the video, practice this, get incredibly comfortable with the direct selection tool because it is something you're going to be using a lot. In this lesson, we're going to talk about how we can work with scaling in maybe a little bit more sort of precise way. All right, so you've probably already seen how I can just select an object and I can scale this, right? So if I just hold down my shift key and click and drag from the corners, great, I can do that. Fantastic, I can do that same thing. And notice how they're all individual layers. I can select them and my bounding box comes up. Wonderful. Now, you do have some other scaling tools that you can work with. So if I right click over here, you're gonna see that there is rotate, scale, reflect, etc. We're just gonna work with scale for right now. Notice the keyboard shortcut is simply just S. So that's pretty cool. So I'm just right there. So if I just hit V, it takes me back to my move tool. If I hit S, that takes me right to my scaling tool. Now, what's nice about this is that I could be anywhere on the screen here, and then watch what happens when I hold down my shift key and just click and drag. I don't actually have to like touch it. I'm just like automatically inside there. Okay, it's great. Actually, I'm not holding down the shift key in this case, right? Because it's automatically set to do that. And bam, there you are. I can go ahead and resize this however I want, not even touching the graphic. Pretty cool. Let's now do this guy here. And this time, so I don't leave the scale tool, I just held down the control key for a split second, or the command key on the Mac, to be able to activate this. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, right? Because now I'll look at this. I'm back in my scale tool without having to do anything at all. And then I'm going to now just click and drag, and then he is now bigger, he is now smaller. Do that, bam, bam, just like that. Let's do the same thing with this one. Hold down the command or control key to then release selection of this, and then simply click on a new object. And now I can just do my thing, clicking and dragging just like that. Okay, so pretty cool. Now I've created kind of some scale and some vantage points. Okay, some perspective. This guy looks like he's way in the back. All right, very nice. All right, so that's kind of your basics of scaling. I mean, it's really, really kind of easy to work with, right? And then it's an easy one to remember as far as your keyboard shortcuts. Now, you will also see, like we've seen in some of the other tools, including the eyedropper and the magic wand, is that if you double click on this, you're going to get a whole bunch of options here in case you wanted to work with these, right? So if you wanted to actually know your exact amount that you're going to actually like make it bigger, this is 135% bigger than it was before, or maybe your vertical and your horizontal are going to be a bit different, you can do that. If things are not coming in the way that you want to, in terms of your scale and your strokes, you can say, hey, don't scale in this way, or do scale in this way. Because sometimes if you got scales, those are going to get, sometimes if you have strokes, those are going to get too big. You still want it to be as one. You can say, hey, don't do that. So therefore, you'll be fine. Okay? So therefore, you won't lose that. And then you can always preview it based off of what you have here. Okay? Based off of what you've chosen. Now, there's another really cool thing, and we get into this a little bit more in my advanced class, is the ability to copy. So maybe you don't want to make any changes to this particular one, but you want to copy. Pretty neat that you can do this. So if I just say uniform, and this time this is going to be, let's just say 80%, and then I say copy, notice what that does. I now have a new one that's separated out from my other guy there. Okay, so pretty cool. So it's not just a basic scaling thing. It gives me the option to, guess what? I can duplicate it and also resize it all the same. Okay, so a lot more nuance than you might realize. So remember, use the scale tool, use your keyboard shortcuts, and then go where you need to go accordingly. As far as resizing it, and then double click on it to go a little bit deeper if you like. All right, so pause the video, practice that, and we'll see you in the next lesson. Now, we just talked about the scaling tool. Within this same little family is also the rotate tool. And we've seen how we can rotate very easily just by simply clicking on it. And I can come to my corners here and I can rotate this. No problem. So maybe that's all you like. Okay, that's great. But now let's go ahead and see if we can do it in a slightly different way. I right click on this. Notice here is the rotate tool. Notice also the letter R if I want to activate that. So again, if I just hit R, that will switch over to rotate. And I can be anywhere I want right on here. I don't have to touch it. Right? I can just be right over here. And then now, look at that. Upside down donkey. All right, go that way. All right, great, wonderful, fantastic. Let me go ahead and do the same thing with this little guy here. Hold down the control key to deselect this. At the same time, select this one. Then at the same time, still stay in my rotate tool. And then bam, there I go. All right, so love that. That's pretty cool. But let's say I don't want it to rotate exactly how it's been rotating. Like, as you notice here, it's rotating right from that center sort of fulcrum, right? So I don't necessarily want that. Okay, so I might want to do it a little bit of a different way. So what I'm going to do is hold down the Option or Alt key and just simply click in the corner of where I want it to be. And two things happen. Number one, that little center point of where it's going to rotate around then moves over here. And then it gives me the option to now even rotate it if I want to be able to see what that's going to do. Okay, it's pretty cool. So maybe I want his feet to always remain the same right where they are. I want to do that. All right, and then also notice here I can copy it, right? So then therefore I can have like several of these. In a future lesson in my advanced class, we're going to learn how to build a mandala or a flower or whatever you want it to be. And we're going to learn how we can actually rotate and copy at the same time. So it's pretty neat. So let me cancel this. And you'll notice that my little fulcrum there is still there. And I can still do that manually. I don't need to actually have that dialog box up. And now, bam, there it is. And his feet remain the same. Okay, so again, a lot more than meets the eye when you go into your rotate tool and also your scale tool. And of course, if you double click, same thing as what we just saw earlier, it pops right up. Okay, so that double clicking is kind of unusual within Illustrator that you don't see it in other programs. So you want to just kind of experiment, just say, hey, what would happen if I double clicked here? What would happen if I double click? And then bam, you'll be very surprised pleasantly to see all the options you have there. All right, pause the video, practice that either on this document or anything else that you have available. Okay, see you in